Well, thank you for being here for this session. We appreciate your interest in our topic. About 3 years ago, one of the things we decided we might start doing in our sessions is something that I call the Preacher's Workshop. And it's designed to basically help those who are gospel preachers, or even those who are thinking about being gospel preachers, who are starting being anybody who's related to the work of preaching and does that, to get some instruction and maybe some venues to where we can discuss some of the things that preachers are called upon to do. You remember the past 2 years we've had some excellent classes in how to teach an adult Bible class. And this afternoon, Brother Don Truex is going to talk to us about training young men to preach and putting together internship programs and preacher training type programs. Of course, I think everybody here knows Don. Usually when you say somebody needs no introduction, it's a cliche, but I think that's probably literally true of our speaker this afternoon. Widely known, widely respected. I think you've been at Temple Terrace for 23 years now, and so we're just delighted to always have him here. He's a great friend of the college and to all of us personally, and we appreciate his work so very much. And so please give your attention to Brother Truex.
Thank you, David. Oh, I'm sorry. That's all right. Well, good morning or good afternoon. Appreciate you being here this afternoon. 1:50. This is prime napping time, and so I appreciate that very, very much. I have a friend who was sitting with a group of college students, and the college students were asking each other, "What's the hardest class you've taken in college?" One of them said, "Well, differential equations." Another one said quantum physics. And they asked my friend, they said, "When you were in college, what was your most difficult class?" And he said 2 o'clock. And I can appreciate that. It's great to see everybody this afternoon. Let's be honest. How many of you are here because you wanted to get a good seat for the chorus concert that's about to happen? And while we're being honest, how many of you are here because you wanted a good seat for the chorus concert and were shocked to find out there was going to be a lecture? But thank you for being here, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to talk for a few minutes about something that is important to me and to many gentlemen in this audience. I'm looking in this audience and see a lot of my peers who have done this kind of work for a lot of years and who all would have extraordinarily valuable things to say today along this line. Last summer, David and I were on a lectureship. David McClister and I were on a lectureship together, and he asked me if I would think about presenting some thoughts about training young men to preach, about internships in kind of a general way. And that's what we will do today. If you have a handout, we're going to divide this into 4 little sections today. And hopefully, as we talk about that, it will be beneficial to us to think about this particular process. Now, I got to look and see if that's working. Perhaps not. Hold on. I don't teach them how to use a PowerPoint projector. Oh, okay, we do not have that. Thank you. All right. Ah, there it is. Okay, thank you. Well, Tom Brady certainly solidified his case as one of the, if not the greatest quarterbacks in history with Super Bowl 51 Sunday night. He has 466 yards and helping his team to score 25 come from behind points to garner his 5th Super Bowl victory. Absolutely amazing. The story of Tom Brady's ascension to legendary status is fairly familiar, I think. It was 2001 in the second game of the season that he actually got an opportunity to play. When the season began, he was 3rd on the depth chart. He had worked his way up to number 2, and in the second game of the season, the Patriots' longtime starting quarterback, Drew Bledsoe, was injured on a massive hit. Well, the Patriots would lose that game. Brady came in and filled in for him. He lost the game. And at that point in time, the Las Vegas oddmakers put the Patriots' chance of winning the Super Bowl at 10,000 to 1. But if you remember the story, Brady then led the Patriots to an 11-3 record in their next 14 games. They won Super Bowl 36 that year. He was named the Super Bowl MVP. Now, what you may not know about that story is that behind all of that was Drew Bledsoe. And Tom Brady credits Drew Bledsoe for much of his success because for those 14 games, Bledsoe became his coach. and his mentor. Even when he was told that when he was healthy again, he was not going to regain his starting job, he didn't pout, he didn't complain. He determined that he was going to help Brady avoid the rookie mistakes that he had made. And so he became a mentor to him, and a coach to him, and a friend to him. And he did everything within his power to help the man who would take his job be a success. There's a reason why those two men are very close friends to this day. In many ways, that story is a microcosm of what we are called to do as we prepare others to serve in the kingdom of God and to one day take our place. As Paul would say, the things which you have learned of me among many witnesses, commit these to faithful men who will be able then to teach others also. And so what I'd like to do today with you is just talk about 4 elements of this work. They're divided out on your sheet. Some of them we'll give a little more time to than others. But let's talk about 4 things along this line. Let's talk first of all today just about this very general concept of mentoring, if we may. And we understand that. I think we understand mentoring in the secular world. Alexander the Great learned from Aristotle, who learned from Plato, who learned from Socrates. And we understand it in the biblical world. So Solomon said, look, walk with the wise and you will be wise. We understand that. And so Joshua walked with his mentor Moses, and Solomon walked with his father David, and Timothy would walk with the Apostle Paul. In the Old Testament, we read about Samuel and about Elijah and about that group or company or school, depending on your translation, of the prophets. These were clearly men who were under the tutelage of their rabbi. Why is that so important? Well, it's important because this doesn't happen naturally. And it doesn't happen naturally today. When Paul said in Ephesians 4 and verse 11 that Christ gave some to be apostles and some prophets and some evangelists and some pastors and teachers. Evangelists and teachers are an important company there, called upon by God to do very important work. And in many ways, it is our task, our mandate, to try to help them be able to fulfill what God wants them to do. Now, that's a formidable task. In 1 Timothy 2, these men must have some innate ability to teach and a disposition of gentleness and patience and humility. In James 3, they must guard their words and be careful with teaching, understanding that teachers will incur a heavier judgment from God. In 2 Timothy 2, he must be a careful student of the word, handling it in such a way that the Lord will be pleased and his auditors, if they follow what he teaches, will be safe. In Joshua 1, he must be strong and of great courage. That will enable him to say with the Apostle Paul, I've not shunned to declare unto you the whole counsel of God. According to 2 Timothy 1, he must, in the face of great difficulty, not be ashamed of the gospel and the testimony of our Lord. And according to 1 Timothy 1 and 2, he must be a man of integrity, a man who will take heed to himself and flee youthful lusts, cleanse himself from anything that would keep him, to use Paul's language, from being a vessel of honor, useful for the master. Well, to help a young man accomplish that, again, is a formidable task. So I just want to ask you this afternoon, what will it take to do that work? I've put on the screen the image of Tony Dungy's book, The Mentor Leader. I like this book very, very much because I like Mr. Dungy very, very much. In his book, toward the end of the book, he has a chapter where he talks about the 7 E's. And I just want to mention them to you because I think that they are relevant to what we are talking about today. He talked about the 7 E's. The first one is the word engage. Engage. And this point is that if we don't engage with those we seek to mentor, we will never understand them and we'll never know enough about them to affect positive change in their life. The second word is the word empower. And we're not processing here on our PowerPoint, so I'll give them to you. You can fill in the blanks there. There we go. Engage. Secondly, empower. And that is that we have to empower them to do their work. One of my heroes is John Wooden. You remember John Wooden, if you're old enough to remember him or you've seen video of Mr. Wooden, you remember that he didn't pace the sidelines. He didn't shout orders on every possession that his team had. His goal was always to have his team so thoroughly prepared that he didn't have to constantly direct them while they were playing. In other words, he prepared them to succeed and then empowered them to do what they needed to do. The third word is educate. Educate. Because you can't empower, you can't elevate a person unless they've been taught what to do and how to do that. and so we have to teach and help and guide. The fourth word is energize, because great mentors energize and they inspire those that they seek to train. The fifth word is equip. That is, we have to provide in our environment the tools, the resources in order for learning to take place and for education and empowerment to occur. And then the sixth word is the word elevate. Elevate. And Coach Dungy talks about the fact that that's what his mentor, Chuck Noll, with the Pittsburgh Pirates, or Pittsburgh Steelers, did for him. That he elevated him. And so he said he has tried throughout his coaching career to try to do that for others. And so if you look at the coaching tree of Tony Dungy, there are 4 NFL head coaches. And he talks about the fact that he hated to lose all of them. But that's what he had tried to train them to do, to be able to go and have greater success than they had had before. And then finally, the seventh word is the word encourage. Encourage. Because encouragement is the fuel that kind of powers our efforts to engage and educate and equip. There's a reason why encouragement is so high on heaven's agenda of how we ought to interact with each other, because God knows that that's absolutely essential, that we encourage each other. We need to be producing preachers that we have encouraged to do this work and do it to the very best of their abilities. Let me ask you this morning, all of that's well and good, but where do preachers come from? Where do preachers come from? I think probably when many of us think of that, we think about Florida College. Well, that's certainly good. I will tell you that I'm very grateful for this school. I'm grateful for the number of preachers that this school has helped produce and polish, myself included in that. And they have done that well for over 7 decades now. But the fact of the matter is, that's not their primary job. We need to be producing preachers in our house and in our church houses. In many ways, moms and dads need to be integrally involved in this. You have to wonder how many parents there are like Hannah anymore, who are just more than willing to dedicate their children to the service of God, wherever that may take them and whatever that work may be. Now, I know there are a lot of parents who embrace that and they encourage that. But I also know that there are some parents who worry much more about their child's future financial situation than their usefulness in the kingdom of God. And we need to be thinking about that in our churches. We have young men in our churches, and when we find them and they have native ability and a servant's heart and a godly bent, we need to identify that, and we need to encourage that and do our best to fan that into greater usefulness in the service of God. Secondly, let's talk about program for a little bit. And we'll just talk about some of the nuts and bolts of that for just a second. I want to ask you 2 or 3 questions along this line with program. Question number one, what do you hope to accomplish? Question number 1, what do you hope to accomplish? That's where that has to begin. And everybody contemplating doing this work, every congregation needs to ask, what do we hope to accomplish? There are different approaches to this work. We need to be honest about that. I have talked with young men who have been through preacher training programs who have come from very academic programs. I had a young man tell me that in his program, his summer program, for example, about all that he did, 8 hours a day, was study. He read books and he studied with the local preacher. That's wonderful. That's a very valuable thing. It's a wonderful thing if a young man can explain the 70 weeks of Daniel 9, but he also needs to be able to say something helpful to people on Monday morning when they go to work, and the young people when they've got to grapple with issues at school. In real life, you typically don't get to sit and read a book for 8 hours a day. And I've talked to young men who've had the opposite experience. I've talked to some young men who have been in preacher training programs that were virtually entirely practical and hands-on. And so they spent their day kind of following the local preacher from visit to visit and class to class, and then beyond that, they were just kind of left to themselves. It seems to me that balance is a key here. That we ought to be looking to blend, number 1, valuable Bible study, which is absolutely imperative. And secondly, discipline, time management, which is critical. And thirdly, meaningful interaction with our brethren. And fourth, excellence in preaching and teaching. But when you decide what you want to accomplish, question number 2 is, how do you find a candidate? How do you find a candidate? Well, again, I think oftentimes our answer has been, well, we go to Florida College. We'll talk to Dr. McClister. We'll go to lectures. We'll find some young men. We'll interview. I've done that. And I have recruited for our preacher training program some very fine young men. And so I'm not minimizing that at all. I'm certainly not disparaging that at all. But again, ladies and gentlemen, I think we also need to look at our own houses and our church houses. And beyond that, when we are trying to decide who we're going to invite to come and be with us, we need to ask a couple of questions. The first one being, does this young man truly want to preach? Does he truly want to preach? Does he have something that we can recognize as fire in his belly for this work? Because quite honestly, we're not really looking for someone who just needs a summer job. And we're not really looking for a young man who's just looking for a bridge out of college. And he's got a couple of years, and before he really finds a real job, he thinks that this would be an interesting thing to do. We're not really interested in that. And so we ask some questions about that. What have you been doing thus far? Even if you're a young man, if you're coming out of college, what have you been doing thus far to prepare yourself for this work that you say you would like to do? How many sermons have you preached? Now, if the answer to that is absolutely none, well, then we have to weigh that as well. Because if what we're going to offer is a summer program, we're probably not going to make too much headway with somebody who's truly starting at square one. Now, a year or 2 year program, you can take that individual and move him a long way along the line. But the second question really is, does he fit what we are looking for? And I think that's an important consideration, because different programs have different emphases. I have a friend who's a little bit younger than me, and they have had a preacher training program in their congregation for several years. He is a very, very scholarly man. And he always is looking for a man who is a little bit more advanced, has a little bit more experience, who can be honed and polished with what he in particular can add to that young man from an academic point of view. And he has produced some wonderful young preachers. I have another friend who's a little bit older, who's been doing this work much longer than I have. And he has, on the other hand, the amazing ability to take a young man of much lesser ability and, somewhat like the Marines, break him down and then begin building him up again and make amazing advances with him. And I think we need to be honest about that if we're going to be leading this kind of a program, what our strengths are. And in fact, one of the greatest challenges, I think, to this work is to be honest with ourselves and what our individual strengths are if we're going to be the ones leading that program. I mean, the first question is, are we even cut out to do this? Are we even cut out to do this? Do we have the patience to do this? And the dedication to begin a process that may be difficult with a young man and see it through to completion. And then the third question is, does this young man have innate ability that can be developed? Does he have innate ability that can be developed? And I think we need to be honest about that as well, that not everyone can preach. And we need to be honest about that. We have typically operated by the philosophy in our churches that if you volunteer to do something, you should be allowed to do it. Well, sometimes that works out fine, but sometimes it doesn't. But when a young man wants to preach, we have to understand this is going to be his life. And if we truly believe that he's not going to be suited to that, we need to be honest about that. The late Brother James P. Miller talked about preaching, and he simply said, it ain't a normal life. And that's right. And if a young man doesn't have the ability to do that work, we don't want a young man to be miserable. So question 2, how do you find a candidate? Then question number 3 is, what will your program look like? What will your program look like? And when you get to this point, you're kind of getting down to business. And I encourage people that when you are going to sit down with a young man and talk with him about coming and being a part of the program with you, you need to have some very clear statements regarding expectations. You need to talk to him about what the expectations are, about how much time he will be in the office, what days that will be, whatever dress requirements there may be. Those are very fundamental, kind of nuts and bolts kinds of things. You need an understanding of how often he's going to preach. That's an important consideration. If you already have two preachers in your congregation sharing the pulpit, then that will make a difference. Sometimes brethren say, well, we will find him lots of opportunities to preach with lots of little churches around the area. Well, all that's fine and well and good, but if you're going to truly critique and mentor him, you're going to have to hear him preach. I was talking with L.A. Stouffer a few weeks ago about this matter, and he said, listen, Don, if you're going to learn to lay bricks, you have to lay some bricks. And he said, churches have got to let these young men preach. And so a follow-up question to that is whether or not your congregation is willing to let this young man go through some growing pains, because they will. They will do that in the pulpit. And then with these young men in your program, there have to be a lot of other things. We talk to young men about how to develop a personal budget. We talk about time division. We give them things to read that will help with that. We try to help them in their PowerPoint development and how to do 1,000 other things that sometimes are ancillary to what we really consider our primary work in a local church. I can give you a little feel for what we do at Temple Terrace. And when I say that, may I just say to you that I understand that's the only perspective that I have is what I've done. And I'm not saying that this is the way anybody else in the world needs to do it. Just as every congregation has to develop a Bible class curriculum that suits their needs and their members, and just as every congregation makes a decision about their gospel meetings, when they're going to have them, the duration, and what the emphasis will be, it's the same with this. I mean, you have to tailor this to your particular circumstance and situation. I can show you what we do at Temple Terrace, and you probably can't read all of this. I'll just, if you can read that, this was an example from last summer. We had a summer intern last year. We prefer to have 2-year programs, but we did a summer internship last year, and we had Luke Adams with us, and this is Wilson Adams' son. And so he was starting at a deficit to begin with. But we worked a lot of Wilson out with him last summer. It took a village, but we made some progress with that. If you can read any of that, you can see that it has all the things that typically you have to touch during the course of a week. We do sermon preparation. We try to tie that with a lot of things that we have them read, and so the reading for this particular week was tied to some sermon preparation. There is Bible class material to be presented. There are Bible classes to be taught. There are a variety of things here. I can read it better up here. There's reading to be done that week. He read Guard the Trust, the 2009 Florida College Lectures. He writes a report on that. We talk about that book. I typically read that along with, as he's reading, I'm reading, and then we discuss that. There are articles that I give. I have 2 notebooks that have been developed over the course of the last several years that are full of all kinds of articles that have to do with preaching and with relationships with brethren, with elders. And so there's some of that every single week. Bulletin article will be written. This week there was a lunch meeting. Once a month with every intern, I have them set up a lunch meeting with an older gospel preacher. This week it was with Ralph Walker. He was the oldest preacher we could find in Tampa. And I asked my intern to prepare 5 questions for this man. The 5th question always is, what haven't I asked you that you believe that I should have? And then he meets every week with Kerry Keenan. You know that Kerry Keenan is my coworker at Temple Terrace. He is a full-time personal evangelist. He is just amazing at what he does. And so one of the benefits of the young men in our program is that every week they work with Kerry Keenan. He instructs them about personal evangelism, and then he does hands-on evangelism with Kerry. And then there is miscellaneous matters. This was a particularly busy week, so the last item I put on the list was assassinate Don Truex if necessary. Just thought I'd put that there for Luke's consideration. Thankfully, he did not check that one off the box. There are a lot of folks who are doing this work and doing it very, very well. The Olson Park Church of Christ in Amarillo, Texas, where Kyle Pope is. Kyle does a wonderful preacher training program, and he has his syllabus for his program online, and so you can look at that there. It gives just all kinds of wonderful information. And then there are just a lot of things, you know, that as you're contemplating this that are very good. These are simple things to read. Brother Bowman's wonderful book on common sense preaching and letters to young preachers, and Berkeley and Banning's Do Things Well, The Pursuit of Excellence, great book. Behind the Preacher's Door, Door, and then Dungy's book, The Mentor Leader. All of those things are excellent as you think about trying to put a program together. In my last 10 minutes or so here, I just want to talk to you about two things. First of all, some challenges. I want to talk about challenges, first of all, for those who are going to lead this program. And the men in this audience who have done this work and done it for years and years, you all could add things to this. But it seems to me that we need to be honest about this, that if you're going to lead this program, there are some fundamental challenges that you will have. The first, and not the least of which, is that it is a significant addition to your workload. It is a significant addition to your workload. Most in your congregation will have a fundamental misunderstanding about that. Can't tell you how many times a young man has preached on Sunday night, and one of the brethren has come by me and said, "Oh, I bet it was really nice to have a Sunday night off and have some free time this week." And they have no idea what it took to get that young man ready for that night. And what you're going to have to do now in the aftermath of his preaching to critique that and help him with that. Think about that. If you've never done that work, think about that. Every single piece of work that that young man generates, you have to read that. You have to critique it, give it back to him and discuss it. Whatever he has to redo, then you must reread and then go back to him again. It is a tremendous addition to your workload. Secondly, you have to avoid the tendency to try to produce a clone, and that's hard for all of us. Every intern is naturally going to pick up some of your mannerisms, some of your words, some of your ways. That just is going to happen naturally. The challenge is to try to nurture and guide young men so that they can develop whatever their innate abilities are for their personality and their way. I think that's especially so in critique of sermons. We don't want a young man just to be a clone of us. And yet, we have to channel that so that he's making progress within the boundaries of his ability. Within the boundaries of his ability. I had a young intern who's in the audience this morning who I was talking about something with his sermon, and he said, "Mr. Don, I just want to be free to be myself." And I told him, I said, nobody is ready for that. And now he's on his own and he is free to be himself, and I know he's doing very, very well. But we have to channel that and yet not try just to produce a clone of ourselves. Thirdly, we need to involve elders with the intern and vice versa. Elders with the intern with the elders, so that they understand that relationship. And especially, I think for those of us, and many of us who are involved in this program, many of the men in this audience who do this work, you are shepherds in a local church as well, just like I am. And so, this young man is now part of our flock. And so it's more than just training him for this, but it's integrating him into other aspects of the work as well. And always encourage leaders, elders in local church, provide for these young men. Make sure you're providing for their needs physically, paying them as you should. We do not allow outside work during the program, and so we try to remunerate them so that they can live and not have to worry about that. We try to provide them tools. So many books are required during the course of our preacher training program. We provide those books for them. We try to provide some other funds for books as well. It's a great thing if you can provide the logo software for them. That will be a tool for them for years and years and years. Don't be Pharaoh with these young men. I mean, give them some straw to work with so that they can do their work. One of the challenges is that sometimes you have to have conversations that are very difficult. And you will always have to have one or two of those conversations where you have to recalibrate and get things back on course. And yet, even with that, we have to be so careful not to defeat them, not to discourage them, but to remember that we're going to try to help them, instruct them, and make them of greater use in the kingdom. And then finally, we have to be honest with them at the end of the program or before if necessary. That's a challenging thing. I have two friends who recently have had interns in their program that it just didn't work out. And so the programs were truncated. They were stopped before really they were intended to. And while that was extraordinarily difficult, it worked out very well for both of those young men. Both those young men are doing extremely well now. But we need to be honest about that. And when we come to the end of the program, we need to understand that. We have in mind that it's a 1 to 2 year program, but we don't have a hard end date on that. If a young man is not ready, to be released, then don't release him on the brotherhood. Do some more work with him. It's important. But when it is time to release him and he is ready, help him with that. I mean, help him find a good hand-in-glove fit so he can go and have a good first experience with his first work by himself. Help him to know what to look for. Help him to know what to ask. We have a series of questions that we go through with young men that I sit down and go with them and say, when you're talking to this church, these will be good things to consider. This will be a good series of questions to ask. And if a church that he's going to talk to does not have an eldership in place, help him with that a little bit. I mean, if he's going to have to deal with a business meeting, help him with that. Help him to understand what that's like. I mean, somebody has well said that a camel is just a horse that was designed in a Church of Christ business meeting. Help him with that. You got to help him know how to navigate his way through that. So those are some of the challenges if you're in the teaching side of that. Now, on the other side of that, for the intern, there's some challenges as well. So there are a lot of young men in this audience today who are here listening to this because you want to be involved in a program or you are involved in a program. And there are some in this room who've done a lot of this work and understand exactly what I'm about to talk about. If you're contemplating this kind of a work, understand that there are some challenges when you deal with young men in these kinds of work. The challenge of developing some self-discipline. And so we try to do some things to help that, because often that doesn't come naturally to a young man. Developing a spirit of cooperation, helping them develop a willingness to take instruction and then to follow through on that. A willingness to know, to be willing to bow your will to the will of your mentor and to others who are trying to help you. A willingness to be a part of the team and to work for the good of the whole church. To learn how to cooperate with shepherds, elders in the local church. And to remember, and this is one of the most critical things, that you don't just work with the young people while you're there. It's integrating with the entirety of the group and having a relationship with all. Thirdly, developing some discernment. Developing discernment. It's learning that you have to earn the right to say some things. That's hard for a young man to realize sometimes. That you have to earn the right to say certain things to certain people. There's some things that I can say at Temple Terrace because I've been there for 23 years. I've been there when children were born, and with those same children, I've done their wedding ceremonies. It has earned me a lot of credibility in the bank. But that doesn't come instantly. And it's hard sometimes for young men to understand that. And the discernment, to not use Scripture as a club with brethren. And the discernment just to know what to say. Inevitably, a young man, at some point in the program, a young man will sit down and say, Mr. Don, is it all right if I say this? And my answer always is, if you're ever contemplating saying something from the pulpit and you have to say, do you think it'd be okay if I say this? The answer is no. That's just the safe course with that. And then helping them develop understanding. Understanding that they are just a servant. Our young men get a lot of attention. They get a lot of praise. But at the end of the day, they need to understand that they're simply a Christian who happens to preach, and all Christians are servants. Could I say this, ladies and gentlemen? Brethren sometimes ruin young preachers along this line. In an effort to be helpful and kind and encouraging, sometimes they praise young preachers so highly that they lose their perspective. We've got to help them retain that perspective. I always tell interns, when somebody comes out of the building on a Sunday night and they shake your hand and they say, you know what, that's the best sermon I ever heard. What they mean is, that's the best sermon I ever heard today. And we have to keep that in perspective. And then developing a love for reading. Developing a love for reading. Can I just watch the movie? That doesn't work with this. You have to read. You have to read your Bible to have the ability to teach and preach it. It's a challenge for millennials. Let's be honest about that. Because their communication grows more cryptic all the time. From text messages, Instagram pictures, snippets of information here and there. And it's not just reading. It's reading material of substance. If you're of my generation, I wonder if there's anybody else like me. I have a lot of junk in my library. Books that I bought when I was younger that really aren't worth much at all. And we try to help them avoid that. There's a long reading list for our program. We try to steer them toward volumes that are going to be good and beneficial, generational in their value. Developing perspective is a challenge. Perspective. Learning to see the big picture of doing work with a local church. That it's not just a sermon in a Bible class, it's people. Levels and levels and levels and levels of people with needs and questions and issues and demands for time and all that goes with that. And then finally along this line, developing excellence. I don't want a young man just to complete his assignments. I want him to complete his assignments with excellence. The motto that we try to instill in them is more than asked, better than expected. Do more than ask, and do it better than is expected, and it will always serve you well. Let me just end with this today. And these are the rewards. And we need to mention that. This is so important. What are the rewards of this kind of work? Well, I'll tell you, the first one is it's encouraging to a local church. It's not just encouraging to you as a mentor. It's encouraging to the local church. We often don't think about that. But the local church derives something from this program. A local church is happy and proud to have had a part in the development of this young man, just like we all are with our sons and our daughters, our children, when we see them growing, making progress and improving. A church feels that way about a young man. One gospel preacher told me a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about this, he said, we've had so many of these young men back for gospel meetings. And he said, you just see the congregation beaming with pride at their growth and development and know that they had a part in that. Secondly, you enjoy an ongoing relationship. It's enjoying an ongoing relationship with these young men. I mean, you come to understand the kind of feeling that Paul had toward Timothy, because this young man is now a part of you, and he always will be. He'll always be able to say, we work together. There will always be a link to you. And almost always, they'll reach out to you, and they'll seek your counsel as time goes on. And thirdly is learning and growing with him. Learning and growing with him, and we don't think about that. But while you're working with a young man, you're learning and you're growing because you're doing that work along with him. And I tell you what, you also benefit from the insight of a younger person. Somebody who's younger than you are and sees the world through different eyes than you do. And there's great value in that as well. There's a tremendous reward of watching them develop and improve and grow. You see some of that in the summer. But I tell you where you really see that is in a year-round program. When you have a program for 2 years, and especially in that second year, you often see such amazing development and growth, and you see this young man truly develop into a gospel preacher. And then seeing them want to stretch their wings and fly. Seeing them want to stretch their wings and fly. That's a great thing. You know, when a young man gets kind of itchy in your program and he's really wanting to stretch his wings and he's wanting to fly, that either means that you've made life so miserable that he can't wait to get out of there, which I hope is not the case, or you've done your work well and he's ready and he's anxious to go and use what you have taught him. And then rejoicing with their future good work and success. Rejoicing in their future good work and success. Because you know what happens with these young men? You hear back about their work. And brethren will tell you of the good that they're doing. I got a call last week from an elder in Louisville, Kentucky, where Dan Langford preaches. Dan was one of our interns. He worshiped with us for 4 years at Temple Terrace, and then he was an intern with us for a summer and then for a year. And one of the elders called me last week, and he was talking about what a great job Dan is doing and the good work that he's doing and how fortunate they are to have him. And he said, I appreciate what you and the church at Temple Terrace did for Dan. You know how gratifying that is. It's just a wonderful reward and blessing from this kind of work. And then finally, and we'll close with this, you just produce amazing gospel preachers for the kingdom. Think about this, ladies and gentlemen. Think about some of the men who've gone through preacher training programs and the great kind of work that they're doing. Men like Chuck Durham and the late Marty Pickup and Russ Bowman and Lawrence Kelly and Bubba Gardner and Roger Schaus and Jeff Wilson and Terry Francis, who's here today. And think about the men younger than that who've recently gone through programs, who are doing amazing work. Young men like Matt McClister, amazingly talented young man. and Matt Bassford, and Jordan Schaus, and Sean Jeffress, who's here today, and Benjamin Lee, and Greg Klein, and Daniel Broadwell. And that list can just go on and on and on and on. Think of the great work that these men are doing in the kingdom of God. What a blessing if we can be a part of that in any way whatsoever. So, Tom Brady has played in 7 Super Bowls, 5-time Super Bowl champion, 4-time Super Bowl MVP, 12-time Pro Bowler, 2-time league MVP. Ask the average man on the street who Drew Bledsoe is, he won't be able to tell you. Ask him who Tom Brady is, and he's almost universally known. And yet, without the presence of an older, wiser, more experienced mentor who was willing to bury his ego and care for and instruct someone that he could mentor and work in the best interest of the team, who knows if all those accolades would have come to it. Listen to the 2 great mentors of all time. Jesus said, "He that would be great among you, let him be servant of all." And the Apostle Paul said, "These things that you have heard from me among many witnesses, commit these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also." Thank you so much.